class profile is a process for a school-based team to have a conversation with a classroom teacher around her class in order to set in place some decisions and a plan of action to better address the learning needs of children in our class. When we look at a class review, we have a series of questions that we ask the classroom teacher. We start with, what are the strengths of your class as a whole? What are the areas you're trying to strengthen? And what kind of goals do you have for a class? And then we talk about the students in the class. I like to go through the list of names of the students, and we talk teacher's voice first, all support personnel following in, about each one of the children in the class or the students in the class, and we categorize them into some areas that need further development, whether they're learning needs, whether they're social needs, whether they're behavioral needs as they're going. So what the class profile is not is an attempt for we as non-enrolling teachers to provide a classroom teacher with information that he or she should be doing about the children who are the most vulnerable in the class, or information they should be doing with, using strategies, whatever. It's a chance for us as non-enrolling support personnel to find out who is this class, what is the community of the class, and to view the class through the eyes of the teacher, and then lend our voices into that. So it's shifting the locus of control. I think in the past, in many of our class reviews, we started with the needs of individual students and then came to the whole class. And this is starting with the whole class and the teacher's voice, because they are heart and soul of what's going on in the class review. As outsiders, we can suggest all kinds of things, but what we suggest has to fit into the context and the community of that classroom, and what is possible for the teacher to do, and we have to recognize the primacy of the teacher. Well, first, of course, we have the school-based team, and well, I don't even know if that's first. Classroom teacher and the school-based team. I want the school-based team to be at all the reviews in my school, so we are developing a consistent picture with all participants in order to make some school profile decisions afterwards. So I can't have people coming in and out, or we're getting an unbalanced picture. So whoever would be typically attending your school-based team meetings. So in all likelihood, you have an administrator, a counselor, a resource teacher, perhaps a speech and language clinician, I don't know who else you have in your division that would come, but it's my standard school-based team, and I think that will vary from school to school a little bit, but the counselor, the resource teacher, and the principal are probably pretty standard, and then classroom teachers. So the classroom teachers are slated in to come and present their class every 45 minutes to 60 minutes. If there is an EA who was assigned to the class because of health and safety needs of a particular student, then I would want them to come as well. Good question. I think they really just need to think about their class, and they need to think about how they're going to come and talk about the class and celebrate the class. That's the first piece. And sometimes when we've got a really complex class, we don't always celebrate as much as we could be, but that's the beginning piece. They need to think about the community of my classroom, the full class. Who's there? What are we good at? What are we trying to strengthen? And to come thinking about what they know. So typically we would have our reviews often around the third week or so of September, and that's given us a little bit of time to start to get to know our kids. Certainly not as well as we know them in January, but it's a starting point. And so you come thinking about those questions in mind. Some classroom teachers like to actually prep an answer before they come, but I find the more we do the class review process, the more relaxed teachers come, and they know they're going to have the questions, so they're thinking about them in advance. In some cases they're not, and then we have a conversation. So it's not a judgmental process, it's an information sharing process with the intent that we are going to come to some decisions about some goals that we have fueled and led by the teacher's voice, and that there will be follow-up from this action plan. It's not just a meeting to share information, it's a meeting to create a plan that we can actually work on. I think sometimes we get displaced by some of the students who are claiming the most time we have in the classroom, and we do that at the risk of missing some of the students who are quieter, who are shyer, who are sometimes better behaved, and so we slide over them and don't notice them as quickly. And so if we just go through each person, there's a better chance that those shy or reticent or just quiet kids actually have a chance of showing up. And sometimes because we're all sitting around the table, somebody who is appearing to do just fine and I'm not noticing as a classroom teacher, maybe somebody that somebody else around the table knows something about. It may be a challenge that's going on in the family, a move that they've had, a success that, it's maybe that a child who's just made a rep hockey team. And if I don't know about that as a classroom teacher and somebody else does, that's really important stuff to know. Well, I'd hope that after the meeting you would find that two things would happen. Some things are decisions that are made right during the meeting, and so I would expect that there may be actually names assigned to some of the decisions. So what I would expect to see the eyes of somebody. Maybe it's a resource piece where and somebody has said, oh, I can find you some books on that the kids could use. So I'd be expecting that to happen. So if there's very finite decisions, I'd expect some follow-up in that. But in some cases, all of the decisions aren't made until after the allocation of personnel has been made in the school. When we've heard, that's why we need the school-based team there, when we've heard from all of the classroom teachers, and then as a team we decide what that resource allocation might look like. So then I might actually see it as a follow-up, where if I find it that you, for example, are going to be the person who's going to be most working with me and my class in whatever way we decide that to be, then we might have another chance to meet perhaps in the next week for 45 minutes, where we now would sit down with our class review and say, okay, let's make some decisions. What can we plan together? That co-planning and collaboration is critical. Oh, it's the heart of what we do. And I think that grows out of the class review process. So let's go back to, I'm the classroom teacher, you're my support person who's, the decision has been made that you're going to be working together. So when we sit, we're going to be working together. So when we sit down with the class review placemat that we've done in front of us, excuse me, then that's the question. Okay, so what can we do together to fulfill this piece? And in my mind, I'm always thinking about, so we start by co-planning, and then can that lead us into co-teaching? And then I look at all the different ways we can co-teach. We can do a seamless model where we make a plan and we work side by side. We finish each other's sentences. You can take half the class, I can take half the class in kind of a parallel group. We can have more of a skills focus going on, where we've got one smaller group that one of us is working with and the other is working with the rest of the class. We can have a chance where you're demonstrating something and I'm doing sort of the backup in the class, or vice versa. So we've got different models that we can follow on. But we look at what can we do together here to provide the range of support that's needed. And it doesn't preclude that sometimes kids might need to be out of the class for some kind of support that's going on. But if we start to co-plan around some shared goals, that opens the door more to me coming in. So sometimes as a resource teacher, if you're talking about lack of organization that students have, or maybe they're not very good at research writing, and that's one of the goals that the teacher has, I can say as a resource teacher, would it be okay if I came and led the lesson on that for a couple of times, because I've got some background in doing some work on the computer, whatever it is, and then you can kind of watch and give me some feedback, and we can talk about what worked with the kids and what didn't, and maybe make a plan for the follow-up. In some areas, schools have taken their class reviews, spread them out, looked at them as a compilation, and that's often the way we are the first step in assigning resource support. But then they've said, so let's use these reviews to create a picture of our school. And then it becomes a school review. So then the school review is presented to a district team who helps with the allocation and helps make the decisions around resource allocation or funding allocation at a division level. So it's impossible to do that if you haven't done the class reviews, right? Because you need that starting place, and then you need to look at your school as a whole and say, same questions, what are the strengths we see in our school? what are the areas we'd like to strengthen? What kind of goals do we have? All schools have goals, right? So we're hoping that the goals that come out of the school review process are actually in line with the goals that we've established as school goals already. And then what would supports look like? That what kind of decisions can we make? How can we make an action plan around this? So it's kind of a natural step. It takes time. And I don't mean that it takes time, that this is an hour-long process kind of thing. I think it takes several years to develop the conversation to a place where what we're getting represents our thinking, that we have to work through what that collaboration looks like, and that takes a little time and a little reflection. So I think the first year, there can be lots of bumps along the road, but I think it's better in the second and third year. And certainly some divisions that I know of that have been working with it in BC are very excited about what they've seen in terms of results, but also talk about the learning that they've made along the journey. We just, system change takes time. So it's kind of like when I'm coaching kids. What else can I say to get you talking? Like, that's a huge piece. And get you talking on target. So if, for example, the teacher says to me, "Oh, they're great kids this year," then I'm going to follow that up with, "So tell me what great looks like. Aren't you lucky? Tell me what great looks like." "Oh, they're always prepared to work." Okay, so just no matter what kind of work you give them, they're always prepared, or there's some kinds of work that they like better than others. Okay, and when you're watching, because they're working well, are you noticing that all students are working? Is there a time of the day where they seem to be working better than others? And so I just keep trying to sort of do what we do as resource teachers, sort of take the task and break it apart to find some avenues, because sometimes I just need to get a trigger there to get the person talking. And it's especially with the strength question. That's the trickiest one, and isn't that a sad state of affairs? But that's the trickiest question often for teachers to start with, because they want to hurry past it to get to the areas of concern. And I just am really adamant that we have to start from strength-based. And so I'm playing around. And so if they start to talk about social issues as a strength, then I'll bring in, so what do the academics look like? If they talk about emotional issues, that sometimes comes with social emotional together, but sometimes it's separate. My kids are independent and they're strong and they're reflective learners, then I'll try and take that into an academic. If they're talking about, what high achievers they are, then I'll talk about the sense of belonging. So tell me what belonging looks like in your classroom. So I'm trying to think about some of those aspects of teaching and learning that we provide additional supports for, whether it's through counseling or the behavior support people, the intervention support, English language learners, academic support, and I'm trying to use that as a filter to pose some questions to expand out a little bit. Yeah, keep your clock in front of you would be a really important piece. I'm thinking that when I'm talking about the whole class, I want that to be about 20 minutes, so maybe 15 to 20, but that's a different part for many of us in the conversation now, so I really think we have to have that piece in there up front. And then moving to the piece where we're looking at the individuals, and we're looking at that again in sort of 15, 20 minutes. And so I'm going to try and keep, it's just, you know so much about your students, but we need to be a bit more conscious of time, because we want to get to the decisions. That's my biggest piece. I want to make sure that when every teacher leaves, even if we're coming back for another decision-making meeting the next week, that when you walk out, you're thinking, here's something that I can do, or here's something that's going to happen. I think without that, it's too easy for it to become another piece of paper that's filed. Well, it may not be a piece of paper, maybe electronic, but it's too easy for it to slip up. Okay, done. Now I can get on with the business of. Initially, we need to keep them as a school-based team, because we need to look at the school as a whole, and we don't want to hold that just in our memories. We want to put out the class reviews, the class profiles, and say, let's look again and see where are our areas of highest need, and do we have a plan for addressing them? So that's our first piece. They're also important when we're trying to build our school profile. Once that's covered, I think, hopefully the classroom teacher wants one, because there's a lot of information on there that's going to be really useful. If it's not, that's a bit problematic, so we have to work on the utility of them again. But the other piece is we want to keep them as a living document. So if I have a copy as the person who's going to be the support person in your classroom, then when I come to have my next meeting with you, or when we're doing some planning, I can bring it out again and say, how are we doing on some of these goals? What kind of success do we see on some of these areas we're trying to stretch and grow? Many schools revisit in January, again in a more formal way, where you come and you actually come back to the team. Some schools review at the end of the year. In a semestered school, I think the time is pretty tight to come back and review again before the semester is up. But sometimes it's a less formal review. So the piece of, again, if I'm going back to you're my main contact person for my classroom, then we can be reviewing it on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis, where we come back and look and say, you know what, let's change some of those goals. I think we've achieved some, or a new one has arisen. And so there's different ways of revisiting. So one of my colleagues, Leighton Schnellert, who's an education professor at UBC Okanagan, coined a phrase some time ago, no plan, no point. And I just think those 4 words are critical. If we get together in any kind of meeting and we don't end up with some kind of plan from it, I think there's been no point in getting together. We have a tendency to over-organize, I believe, sometimes as a system, and meet together and talk and talk and talk, and nothing happens. Information sharing by and of itself, with no plan, it's not enough. Our time is too precious with our students that when we get together and we're sharing important information, it needs to end up as a plan. So no plan, no point. I think it needs to be visible. Okay, because then we get, as a facilitator, I get a chance to glance down and see how far down the list we've gone. But it's also a good trigger for those of us sitting around the table. So I can be thinking about, oh, here comes Michael's name. I've got some information to add on to Michael. So I'm organizing my thinking, maybe as the guidance counselor, as I'm going through, or the speech and language clinician. I'm sort of glancing down and I'm thinking ahead about some of the kids that I see. So it's like with anything that we do, transparency counts. And in some schools, they've put it online. And so the recorder is actually recording, and you can see it on the smart board as they're going on. And so not only that, we're getting to edit the pieces that are there. And sometimes we need a little more think time. So I see, oh yeah, I can add on something to that. So the visibility of the recording, the visibility of the student list are both important pieces.